Yo, what's up, my beautiful people? Hope y'all enjoying this day. It's hot out here in New Orleans. Um, I just wanted to make a quick video. I was reading Daniel chapter 3, and that's the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And many people know the story. I touched on the story before, but I just kind of want to shine a light on something else that I've paid attention to in the story. And it's actually, I think, was for me personally also. In Daniel chapter 3, verse 20, King Nebuchadnezzar had already sent the soldiers to get Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego because they wouldn't bow to his statue that he made. They served God and they wouldn't bow to no other God. So they, King Nebuchadnezzar commanded the soldiers to go get them. And in verse 20, he commanded that the mighty of men in the army was to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the fire. He wanted them to be tied up. You know when they bind you, tie you up by your arms or legs or whatever, and then throw you into the fire. But I want you to pay attention to something. If you read down to verse 24 and 25, it said, Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and he rose in haste and spake to his counselors and said, Did we not throw 3 men bound in the midst of the fire? He said 3 men bound, which means, did we not throw them up, and weren't they not tied up when we threw them in the fire? They answered to the king, True. So the king said, But look, lo, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire. It's not just the fact that Jesus were in the fire with them. They were no longer bound in the fire. When you're going through and you're thrown in the midst of a fire, not only is Jesus going to be with you, but he is going to loose you from whatever has you bound. See, we go through day to day wanting to be set free. But the chains and the shackles that had them bound weren't loose till they were in the fire. It takes situations to break the chains that's on us, the things that have us bound. It's when we get in the midst of the fire that when Christ looses us. That's the purpose. Sometimes we don't understand why we go through what we go through. Sometimes we don't understand why we're being thrown in the fire. But not only is God trying to show us something, he's trying to loose what has us bound. In our hard situations, our tough situations is when we become loose. Is when it makes sense. Is when we start to understand that Jesus is with us and he is going to free us, and we're going to be walking around in the midst of the fire. We're no longer going to be bound. That's when you're set free. When you're in the midst of your situation is meant to free you. Jesus could have broke those chains while they were standing in front of the king, but Jesus did not set them free from what had them bound until they were in the fire. You may not know what has you hostage. You may not know what has you caged and has you bound, but guess what? Your hardest situations is what's going to teach you, and it's what's going to set you free. You don't know how strong you are until strength is all you have. Some of us are mentally, emotionally, psychologically bound. But the fire is what's needed. The fire is what's required to set you free. To make whatever has you bound loose. And when you're loose, he's with you. He's been with you. But when you're in the midst of the fire, is when you see him. Because he's all you have. Sometimes we're blinded by things. We don't see God. We don't understand that he is with us. But when you're going through, how are you still making it? Because it's not just you in that fire walking around. It's you and Jesus in that fire. But you need the fire to be set free. Get what he is trying to do for you in your fire. Get what he is trying to show you. Get the message. Get the freedom that he is trying to give you in your fire. The chains are falling off in the midst of the fire. The bounds are falling off, being broken in the midst of the fire. Your brokenness is going to fall off in the midst of the fire. Your heartache is going to fall off in the midst of the fire. Your pain is going to fall off in the midst of your fire. In the midst of the fire, that's when you're going to be set free. In the midst of it all. In the midst of it all, he kept me. In the midst of it all, he saved me. In the midst of it all, he broke the chains. That's when the shackles are let go. Your fire, let me throw something else out there before I finish. It said they were walking free in the midst of the fire, and they have no harm or form. They had no harm to them. The fire is not meant to do you any harm. The fire is not meant to hurt you. It's meant to break your shackles. They had no harm done to them. You may feel like you're at your wit's end because you're going through, but you actually are not being harmed. You're actually being purged. You're actually being cleansed. You're actually being set free. The chains are falling off. That's what the fire is doing. I know you don't want to be in the midst of it, but it's not harming you. It's not meant to harm you. You will come out and it say the form of the four looked like the Son of God. They saw God. In your fire, your enemies who tried to burn you are going to see God in your life. They're going to see him. They looked in the fire and they saw God in there with you and saw that you had no harm done to you. Your fire is not meant to burn you. Your fire is meant to break your chains, break what has you bound, break what has you shackled. Embrace your hard times, because that's where your freedom lies.